So how do neurons communicate their information? Well, neurons communicate information using two methods, electricity and chemistry. When a neuron is receiving information, it does that by way of structures called receptors. I'll say more about those in a minute. Receptors trigger electrical signals, basically, which change the activity of the neuron in such a way that there's a constant electrical flow going on. So electromagnetism is the key principle here. You've got a constant changing flux that's going on all the time. Now sometimes that flow builds up to such an extent that it triggers an action potential. An action potential is a very sharp spike, if you like. They're called spikes, impulses, firing, all sorts of names for them. But basically, if you plotted it on a graph, it would look like a very sharp spike, a change in electrical activity. And that electrical activity, that signal, is then propagated all the way down to the synapse. That's where the chemistry comes in, because when the action potential reaches the synapse, it triggers what's called vesicle release. Now, a vesicle is just a complicated word for a package. The synapse contains lots of little packages. It's like a little holding store, and those packages have got a chemical in them called a neurotransmitter. When the signal from the action potential comes racing down the axon, comes to the synapse, it triggers the release of these packages. So if you imagine them as like a little plastic ball full of neurochemical, meets with the cell membrane, merges with it and spits out its contents into the synapse. Now the synapse is a bulge with a little gap and then a recipient on the other side. So if you imagine it as two cells very closely together, the term synapse actually means to touch together. There's actually a little tiny gap between them, and it's across that gap that the chemicals flow when they're released. When they are released, they then activate receptors on the dendrites of the recipient cell, and the whole process starts again. So that's the basics of what is going on.